Okay, so without perhaps embarrassing yourself too much, maybe. Um, uh, I'm wondering if anybody has a good story of where the strangest place that you've ever slept was. I have one. While you're thinking, so it was when I was well, probably 12 or 13. I was at a camp in Pennsylvania, and we went up on this mountain for a camp out, and we got up there, and we're during the night after we had gone to sleep and everything. We're just under these lean-tos with plastic on the top for some kind of shelter. That was it. But all of a sudden, there's this thunderstorm. So um, I'm on this mountain during a lightning storm, and there's holes in the plastic. So I'm trying to contort myself around the drips. Plus, I'm kind of next to a tree, so there's this like root that I'm trying to avoid as well. And so it was a very odd night of sleep. You want to call, and our camp counselor woke up in like an inch of water because he was kind of on a hill, so the rain just kind of went down into his lean-to, and so he wakes up in all this water. Yeah.
For me, the weirdest place is I fell asleep twice in the playground things. You know the round tubes, the little ones, the little metal ones. Mm-hmm. I fell asleep in them twice.
For how long? Was it a while?
Quite a few hours.
Dang.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. They didn't know where I was
at. Anybody check the tube?
I have a story similar to yours, Kevin, but it was just a few years ago. A friend of mine who was homeless at the time. She might be Jewish, but anyway, she's from the South originally. She was an interesting gal, but she wanted to go camping over at Riverside State Park or whatever. Up north a little bit. So we took the bus as far as we could, and she called a taxi, and we took a taxi there. And she, we had food. We stopped at the little store thingy that they have right there, and got other things that we needed. And asked if it's okay to do a fire. So we lit pine cones and stuff, which was really cool. But so we had food and water and whatever else, provisions and whatnot. But we had no tents. She thought we would be okay. I was hoping she was going to get a tarp. Didn't. And so here we were, not ready to, go to bed for the night. And, we had blankets and pillows and sleeping bags and stuff. And it starts lightning and thunder. And then it starts raining. Softly at first, thank God. But so we packed up our blankets and stuff and went and slept in the women's bathroom. Oh, wow. We should have looked at the weather report for that weekend. But the next day, we got up and walked around and hiked a little bit, and I took some pictures. She wouldn't let me take any pictures of her. She was out that way, but so I took most of the pictures of scenery and stuff, and then we ended up getting a taxi back into town. So, yeah.
A couple different summers.
Oh.
Sorry, go ahead.
I fell asleep in my bedroom closet.
Yeah.
It was like a sliding door closet. It wasn't a walk-in.
Yeah, we couldn't find her for nothing.
I was mad at my brother about something and went in there to hide and stole it. Fell asleep and nobody could find me.
You're about to I slept for 2 weeks, couple different summers in the trunk of our car.
Mine's not a weird place,
Yeah, the trunk.
Not a weird place is floor contortionism. I had the cat and both of our dogs on the bed, and they all wanted to sleep in a certain spot. So I'm having like twist my leg around one and put my ankles on another, do that kind of stuff. Those, you know, they're picky. You don't be so bad that you can off your bed.
In the Marine Corps with artillery fire.
Yeah, there you go.
Wow.
So he's tired.
Yeah. You're
Yeah.
tired.
And how long were you up?
Alex is going, oh, I don't know. Quite a bit.
Oh, yeah.
Where was that?
Yeah, it was actually it was in, was somewhere.
Somewhere over there.
I have kind of a sordid story. I was living in Oregon. I used to hitchhike to see my dad every year or so, there for a while. One night I didn't want to call him. I don't know why. I didn't want to call him the phone. I guess it was late, and a semi had given me a ride and left me off somewhere, and so I started walking. And I'm walking, and I'm walking, and I'm walking. Like the middle of the night, and this big black man comes out and says, "You need a place to sleep?" And so I went in and slept on his couch, and I woke up and he was just looking at me, and I was like, wow, this is really stupid. This really could have been bad. No kidding. But I got some rest, and then, you know, it was light, and I could walk on, and eventually I called my dad. But,
You were brave. I would
Dad was
never
with you.
have been able to do
I
that.
was exhausted.
No, I mean to even
Dude's all
hitchhike
creeping
on
Oh, I
the
know.
Yeah.
You sleep, go back to bed.
Yeah.
That's great, yeah, man.
You want some breakfast?
Yeah.
I thought he might be
Eggs and
mentally
bacon.
in a mental case or something, because he didn't communicate very much, you know. So I don't know. Yeah, it was. Yeah, it happened. And you're here today. Yes.
You're the one that got away. Praise God.
God
Seriously.
has his hand on you.
Amen to that. I mean, that's why he was creeping over you. He's probably thinking about that. The Lord intervened. He's like, not her. Not her. You know? Nice, yeah, cool. You seem like a good guy. Oh, yeah.
People all remember each other.
Yeah.
You all be quiet down there.
Bates Motel, right?
Yeah.
All right. Well, oh,
I
my.
was really, really little when this happened. I don't remember a whole lot. But I was spending the night at my mom's friend's house called in Delaware. And we slept in her gazebo.
Wow.
Yeah, that's not
Her
bad.
gazebo. That's all I remember.
There's actually a gazebo on the property of senior. Like a
She
nursing
lived
home.
right behind.
Well, there by where we live?
The nursing home that Mr. Loomis lives in.
Yeah. Up the street and around the corner, kind of.
I can do this one even kind of weirder than that one I had picked, but actually it was more scary than weird. It might just sound weird to some people, but my mom and I slept in the car behind a dam when we were hiding from my stepfather once. Scary. I don't think I slept much at all. Yeah.
Above or below?
Behind.
Under the water.
Yeah.
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 Think about it. It's hard to sleep in the car because there's, you know, there's no curtains or anything. I can look in. I'm freaked out.
All right. There was purpose for that. Some of partially just it was something that came to mind. Thought it'd be fun to tell stories like that. Not talking about like when you wake up and you're like, how did I get here? But which I've never actually had that experience. But Leviticus 23:34, God tells, well, he's talking to Moses, says, "Speak to the children of Israel, saying, the 15th day of this 7th month shall be the Feast of Tabernacles for 7 days to the Lord. On the first day there shall be a holy convocation. You shall do no customary work on it. For 7 days you shall offer an offering made by fire to the Lord. On the 8th day you shall have a holy convocation, and you shall offer an offering made by fire to the Lord. It is a sacred assembly, and you shall do no customary work on it. There are the feasts of the Lord. These are the feasts of the Lord, which you shall proclaim to be holy convocations, to offer an offering made by fire to the Lord, a burnt offering and a grain offering, a sacrifice and drink offerings, everything on its day. Besides the Sabbaths of the Lord, besides your gifts, besides all your vows, and besides all your freewill offerings which you give to the Lord. Also on the 15th day of the 7th month, when you have gathered in the fruit of the land, you shall keep the feast of the Lord for 7 days. On the first day there shall be a Sabbath rest, and on the 8th day a Sabbath rest. And you shall take for yourselves on the first day of the fruit of beautiful trees, branches of palm trees, and boughs of leafy trees, and willows of the brook, and you shall rejoice before the Lord your God for 7 days. That's where we get the lulav from. You shall keep it as a feast to the Lord for 7 days in the year. It shall be a statute forever in your generations. You shall celebrate it in the 7th month. You shall dwell in booths for 7 days. All who are native Israelites shall dwell in booths, that your generations may know that I made the children of Israel dwell in booths when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. So Moses declared to the children of Israel the feast of the Lord. So, what is the purpose behind living in a tent for 7, 8 days?
I think it's because we're living in a shelter that is movable, and so in the desert, they had to pick up and go whenever the Lord left, and it's something that was just literally they could pack it up that day and go. And I think that's the biggest thing is we need to be ready and prepared to pick up and go whenever God calls. And I think that's the biggest thing.
Well, we see that too in Matthew 24. Don't even, when you come down from your rooftops, don't even get nothing. Don't even get your cloak. Just bug out. Get out of there. Head straight to the hills. Don't even turn around. Right?
These laws are being given to Israel when they're in the wilderness. They're at Mount Sinai. But when are they going to start keeping these fall feasts? When they're in the land. It's an important thing to pay attention to, because the Feast of Tabernacles in particular is going to be a reminder to them of how their ancestors dwelled in booths, tents, whatever you want to call it, in the wilderness. And so that's implying that, okay, now by the time they're celebrating this holiday, they are now in the land and they're living in permanent structures. And so then they're going to live, like you said, in a temporary mobile structure as a reminder to them of how their ancestors lived in the wilderness. Now, I think it's important really all the holidays of God is to understand the story that those holidays are bringing us back to. And where is it in Israel's history that we're being brought to? Because, for example, in Passover brings us back to Egypt. Well, the story of Egypt is a redemption story. So it's all about redemption and salvation. When you get to Shavuot, the giving of the law, also the giving of the Spirit, but the original holiday, Shavuot, was the giving of the law, which is Sinai, which is in the wilderness. Well, the wilderness is no longer redemption, it's more sanctification. It's more learning how to trust in God and learning who you are as a child of God and how to live in that. And it's a place of learning and testing and growing in your relationship with God. When you get to the fall feasts, you're dealing with being in the land. You're in the promised land, but then these tabernacles in particular is then bringing the people who are in the land back to the wilderness. So it's still about the wilderness, but it's after you've gotten in the land. So what is, he's not bringing his people back to Egypt. He's not reminding them of how their ancestors lived in Egypt. He's not saying be a slave for 7 days, thankfully. Yeah. He's bringing them back to the wilderness. And so we have to pay attention to what he's trying to bring his people back to, and what he's trying to remember them, or cause them to remind them of. Yeah. Wow. Not everything is firing. Well, it's questionable whether it does anyway, but you know, yeah, even less than normal. So what's when we're thinking about, we treat Sukkot as a week of sanctified camping, and to some extent it is that way. But it's almost like, according to Scripture, the first and last days are Sabbaths. But ideally, if you were able to, which very few people can, the whole thing would kind of be a Sabbath, and you would just totally get out of your normal life, out of your home, out of everything that is familiar and comfortable to you, and you go out in the woods and you're camping for that week. But it's for a purpose. It's not just camping. It's more than that. It's a purpose. God is bringing his people back to the wilderness because he's bringing them back to where they were at where Israel was at that point in their relationship with God. When you get into the land, it's life becomes more complicated. There's a lot. They're beginning to become a nation unto themselves. They have conflicts with other nations, and they're being involved more in like commerce with other nations, and so there's a lot of stuff that becomes more complicated. There's things that are better. You get to eat more than just manna every day. Yeah. And you're actually able to plant crops and bring in a harvest, and you're able to have normal jobs and just do things that you could not do in the wilderness. I mean, you have to think about it. In the wilderness, what did they have to do all day?
Pack up and tear down and set up. Pack up, tear down.
Pretty much, collect manna. They didn't even have to worry about, well, where's our food going to come from? God provided that for them every day. Why? So that they wouldn't have to worry about that. They don't have to take the time to think, okay, we've got to send out hunters and we've got to try to catch food, and we've got to do this and that, and try, your whole life, so much of their life could have been absorbed with collecting enough food for 2 million people that would have become life, and that's not what God wanted. So He provided that for them. So okay, you don't have to worry about that. You don't have to worry about where your water is going to come from. Just
even after
scoop the
camping
rocks
3 or
and-
4 days, man, I'm ready to go home and get back to normal. I can't imagine doing it as long as they did. I can't, that would get.
Well, what blows my mind, I'm 41, and they were in the wilderness for 40 years, and they ate manna that whole time. So I can't imagine being my age.
Almost the whole time.
Well, almost, yeah. Well, I guess they had some, yeah. But they got sick on it.
Oh
So,
God.
This juice tastes
Experience is
wonderful.
wild.
yeah.
No cacti in that.
But being my age and like pretty much for the most part having eaten nothing but the same thing every
But
day.
that would be normal for you.
It would be, I guess so.
Yeah, but we're in a conversation, man.
Yeah, but that would be like eating oatmeal for breakfast every freaking morning. It's just not-
And lunch and dinner. Yeah,
What do you
yeah.
say? What do you say to your significant other, man? If you come, hey, honey, guess what I've
Only
done
10 mornings in a row. And you get a break.
Manna?
Yeah. What's for dinner? Manna?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, look, think if you're an angel, right, and you're watching them.
Yeah.
Yeah?
I don't have to answer that question anymore.
Yeah.
I know.
It's manna.
Right.
And think how bad the angels must have felt. That's what we eat, man. You got a problem with that?
They did
Yeah.
not have to make out a grocery list, and they didn't have to do meal planning.
Yeah.
How nice for them.
They-
Somewhere in the scripture that says that the angels are very complex
Mhm.
They are.
our behavior. They think we're weird.
Yeah, there is that place. And it talks about that they also marvel at salvation because they don't have that salvation experience. They're locked in that state, so they don't know what it's like to be a creature that's full of sin and then redeemed like that. They always kind of marvel at how does that work?
Because I have the choice and that was it.
Yeah, so that's an amazing piece of scripture that ties in with what Tom was saying.
So, due to being in a wilderness and moving around so much, they didn't have farms to tend to. They had some livestock to tend to,
Okay.
but how long does it take to go and feed some animals every day? And so the main point is they didn't have a whole lot to do. They didn't have a whole lot of responsibility. They didn't have a whole lot that they had to try to figure out. Every once in a while they had a battle with some nation or something, and usually God gave them the victory over it. And so they had a lot of time to think, and if they used the time properly, they used the time to learn who they were in God as His children, and who God was as their God and King, and what He expected of them, and how to trust in Him better. And now some of them, as we read over and over again, there were some that they didn't like the situation, and they spent their time trying to figure out how to get out of it, and what to do about it. Oh, we got to get rid of this Moses guy, or we got to do this and that. Maybe we should go back to Egypt. We need a different God. We need to do this, and they would get their followers, and then God would say, nope, that's wrong, and then everybody else would like, oh, we don't want to go with them. That's a bad idea. And overall, even with the failures, overall Israel would learn how God is their king, and how to have trust in Him and faith in Him, and be loyal to Him. And when He says move, you move. When He says stop, you stop. And when He says go to war with these people, you go to war with those people, and not tomorrow, today. When you had that whole story where He says go to war. We're like, no, we don't want to. And then there's like this whole pep rally kind of thing. Like, okay, we're ready. Nope, not anymore. That was yesterday, not today. And so you really see them as children learning who God is and what's right and what's wrong, and sometimes they fall down, but then God brings, teaches them what's right, and they come back, and so, but overall, he has them in a situation and in an environment that isn't pleasant, but it's simple, and so that they can focus more on the basics of their faith. They get in the land, things are more enjoyable, but at the same time, there's a lot more distractions, and life gets a lot more complicated. And when you have a lot of distractions and a lot of complications, God tends to take a back seat. Yeah, and I think that's why God gives His people Sukkot every year. He's okay. You got to get out of that stone house that you live in, out of your comfortable life that you live. Get out of your theology schools, because even in our theology, we can get studying the Bible and we get in on and it's easy to get on all these theological tangents
get dogmatic on certain
yeah,
things, man.
and you lose sight of the basics of who you are and who God is and what God requires of you. And you have these little reminders here and there, even in the Old Testament, in Micah 6:8. What does God require? To love, mercy, speak humbly, or walk humbly with your God, whatever that is. Yeah. Yeah. And so every once in a while, you're kind of brought back to center. Go, what does God really require? It's like the simple 2 or 3 things that He wants us to do, and Yeshua then does it during His day. What are the 2 greatest commandments? To love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. 2 commands. That's at the heart, and so every so often He has to drag His people and bring them back to the heart of their faith and their relationship with Him, and that's really what we're doing during Sukkot. We that the whole camping experience is meant to kind of simplify life to a greater degree, so that we can put more focus on the more central, more important, basic aspects of our faith. When you get into, we start going down the road of tradition, it actually complicates things, and so it defeats the purpose that God originally had. And then I had to think. I thought about this week. I was like, you know what? I don't know. Maybe John knows this better than I do. If he knows it, he has a better chance of knowing it than I do. But at some point or another, we went from, pretty sure that things haven't changed a whole lot. If you look at how nomads live in the desert in Middle East today, what kind of a structure do they live in? It's a tent, like all enclosed kind of tent. It's not this like flimsy wooden structure with like palms on top of it and only 3 sides. If I'm going to go to like Death Valley and I'm going to go camping out there, the last thing I'm going to want to sleep under is something that's missing a side. A 3-sided structure. I'm going to wake up with some like scorpion on my face and a rattlesnake in my in my sleeping bag, and I'm like, no, that's not happening. So I don't know at what point we came up with the rabbis came up with this certain structure that's supposed to be. I can guarantee you, when you went back to the wilderness, people were not living in what we think of as a sukkah today.
You know what? In antiquity, that's why I love studying this type of stuff. In biblical antiquity, what they do know is from the Bedouins even to this day. You know what their tents are made of? Camel's hair. You know why they make them out of camel's hair? Because camel's hair has a way of thinning itself during the day, so you can catch whatever type of breeze may flow through. But when water hits, it tightens up. So it makes a natural sealant once water starts raining down. it swells and fills the gaps in between. And then when it dries out, it shrinks back down again and allows air to flow to and fro. When I found that, when I heard that by one of those Israeli professors who was talking about that, I was like, dude, now that is cool, man. How much sense does that make, man? So you wouldn't have got rained out. Once the water would have hit, when it did, that camel hair woven in would have sealed that all up.
Yeah, well, that was something else that I thought. I don't know how often it rained in the wilderness. I mean, it's kind of, it does, maybe it maybe didn't rain that much. But that's another thing. I'm going camping. I don't want to go camping in some structure with a hole in the roof, you know. I'm not caring about if I want to see the stars, I'm going to go outside the tent and look at the stars. You know, if I'm going to. So.
Deuteronomy 29:5. For 40 years I led you to the wilderness to get your clothes and sandals did not wear out. You have to go to Walmart.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Hunter showed me a video of somebody one that designed now inflatable suit.
Yeah, I put a link on there today. I was joking about it yesterday, and then I see a link today about it. I was like, no, that would be convenient, but it's a little okay. Yeah, 45 seconds, you know. Like, sweet.
Well, the Israelites would have given the right
I know.
And going back on what you said, remember the whole deal with being stuck and being idle? There's that old school saying, man, which is an idle mind is a playground for the devil. And if you remember right, remember all the bickering, all the infighting that Moses had to deal with all the time. Oh, yeah. This person. Oh, there's Yochanan and Marine. They're over there married. They're over here bickering again. They're arguing in their tent again. Come on, bring them over. So you have all this infighting going on, which is why Jethro comes around and says, dude, wow, you can't deal with all these people and their issues. You're going to have to set up local community judges that are going to foresee all these different cases. So as they're still doing what they're doing, you're trying to teach them what the Lord is saying. And at the same token, everybody's complaining. And then you've got the rebellious group, like you pointed out. But then you've got everybody else that still doesn't always see the vision and is falling off and bickering and arguing and stealing and taking somebody else's stuff. And you're just like, dude, this is ridiculous, man. So it's very tough, man.
Nobody needed a doctor. Deuteronomy 7:15, the Lord will keep you free from every disease. He will not afflict you with horrible diseases if you don't need it.
Which makes sense because what does a disease do? If you have a flu, a common cold, anything like that, it spreads. When in a community like that, which wouldn't have a lot of access to water to wash their hands, isn't it amazing how God works? Now, then we read it. Now we look at it with all the scientific means that we have, validate scientifically the way germs are spread. That's why God supernaturally keeps them free of disease, because we know now that if you don't properly wash your hands, if you stay in close proximity, if you have a cold or a flu or whatnot, it spreads like wildfire. Yeah, well, the whole crew would have been one family, and then everybody would have been sick. So God has these amazing purposes, even far beyond what it originally is. The context is so much more when you look at the information we have now in 2014.
I think that it all goes back to manna. It was a superfood.
And that could be
full of antibodies, probably. It had carbs. It had protein. It had probiotics.
Everything that they needed. Yeah.
That's a good commentary on that.
Yeah.
Got everything you need.
So we think of Sukkot as like this. Well, I talked last week about how these three holidays, trumpets, and then Yom Kippur and Tabernacles, they all go together. And the way we generally seem to think about these holidays is you start out with trumpets, and that gets our attention and gets starting to get right with God and our fellow man, and then that culminates with Yom Kippur, and that's supposed to be traditionally that's a somber day and afflicting yourself and all. But then when you get past that, and it's assumed that you've done what you're supposed to do, you're right with God, so now you're able to commune with Him, and you have this week-long party, basically, and that's what Tabernacles is. But when you really think about what God is doing with His people, He's taking them out of their complex yet comfortable life and environment, and He's saying, okay, I'm essentially sending you back to the wilderness for a week just to live in a tent. And the way it's meant to be observed, it's really not that much of a party, you know. There's some fun aspects certainly to camping out, but there's a challenge to it, and there's things that maybe you want to do, but now you're not around those things, and you're having to focus more. The purpose is really to focus more on God and getting back to that to the heart of your relationship with Him. There's a certain seriousness to it where it's not just camping or living in a tent or sleeping in a tent at night or whatever. There's a certain seriousness to it, so that then it kind of grounds us. It gets us back to the foundation of our faith, and then once we're done, then we really are set to then go into the winter months, essentially on fire for God and having our relationship with Him renewed and restored, and we're ready to do whatever it is He wants us to do in our lives and in our communities, our world. And so He's preparing us for work or for battle or whatever it is He wants for us, and that's what we have to have that mindset of what is God wanting me to do, and how is He wanting me to live out my faith. But he wants us to come back to that foundation before we move on.
Which is interesting because look at when Yeshua talks about an example of the ant. Remember? Talks about how the ant in themselves are always in unison. They work as one body for a collective goal. They don't, they really don't rest. They don't sleep, man. Everybody takes their shifts and their turn, and they move with one common purpose and goal. And when it's time to store up for those winter months, like you're saying, they don't mess around. If they know when to do it, they do it, and they continue to just move forward.
Honeybees works as you know.